What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest is somebody with extensive experience in leading projects and building teams in the hospitality, construction, and consulting industries. He's taken a special interest and is extremely passionate about the environmental impacts of design and encourages embracing more sustainable design efforts. He's been featured in American Builders Quarterly, Metropolis Magazine, HD Magazine, Hotel Executive Magazine, and Pacific Edge Magazine. He's currently a judge for Sleeper Magazine's Ahead Awards. He's the Executive Vice President of Construction and Design at Lucid, Highgate's in-house design and construction studio. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this in-person interview I did with Paul McElroy. Enjoy. So first of all, thank you for inviting me in here. We're at the So-and-So Piano Bar at the Romer in Hell's Kitchen, which just opened a week or two ago.
A few weeks ago, yeah.
And it's really cool. And I'm inspired to do parties here. And get-togethers. This is like a really cool space. And the photos don't do it justice. And who designed it?
Goodrich, Matthew Goodrich.
Another one of my favorite people.
Yeah.
So I want the listeners to know how I want an outcome of this conversation to one of the many outcomes to be how small collisions or conversations can lead to tremendous impact. Okay. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can get there. But if I were to share with the listeners, when you started at Highgate, you said you're really excited and you want to really be an agent of change and use the platform for having a positive impact from a sustainability perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And you brought up this platform called MindClick, and you said, it's really important to you. I want to make this change. Can you please take this seriously, really look at it, and get Berman Falk on board? And that, I don't remember exactly when that was, 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, about 3 years ago.
3 years ago. We went through the process. It was really instructive because oftentimes if you want to change, you have to measure things. You can't change things if you don't measure them. Sometimes you don't like to see what those measurements are, but it provides a framework for how to move forward. And since that conversation with me, and I'm sure you had that conversation with countless other people, the FF&E and product that we provide to your projects and that are provided to your projects, we've all made these changes to continually improve. And even though we came out as a highly ranked company, we saw that we could eliminate all foam from our packaging. And that seems like a really small thing, but it's actually tremendous when you think of waste towards the end of the installation cycle. So,
and the scale at which you're doing it.
And the scale, correct. So what I wanted to say is thank you, because without that conversation, we wouldn't have been on this path. And I know that I'm just one drop of water, but there's hundreds of others that I'm sure have had the same impact. And when you look at all of this holistically, the final impact is incredible. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for being open to it.
Yes.
Because not everyone is.
Yeah.
And you're right. You're one of many. And when we started kind of on this journey with intention, like 4 or 5 years ago, we knew we didn't have the answers, but we had to start.
Mm-hmm.
And no one has all the answers on how to do this perfectly, but collectively and at the scale that we, do projects and the scale of our business, if we can get everyone to do a little bit, to your point, it adds up to a lot. And we researched back 5 years ago, how do we start measuring ourselves? Because we have to hold ourselves accountable. And we're ultimately the ones getting ranked. Each individual vendor and partner gets ranked for their piece of the project, but it's us, Highgate, that's being ranked for our holistic supply chain. And we didn't know what the results were going to be on our first project, but we were like, we have to start, we have to measure, and we're going to get better and better and better. And we've done maybe 8 or 9 projects, completed 8 or 9 projects now with the MindClick program. And we're learning every single day. And now we're learning, like, we're measuring FF&E, which is a huge impact. But what about base building materials? What about the other parts of the project that we need to start measuring that? So that's kind of our next journey with them, is how do we start to measure the things that we're not currently measuring, but also have massive impacts? If you do a topical renovation, you're not really touching a lot of base building materials. But if you're doing projects like this, a lot of the projects that we undertake are big, what I call open heart surgery to old buildings. And when you're doing those projects, you're touching a lot more than just FF&E and OS&E. There's a lot of drywall, tile. There's a lot like HVAC. There's a lot of things, ductwork, sheet metal, all these things that need to start getting measured, because when you guys change your foam, for example, for like a project of ours, we're impacting the whole industry because you're changing it now, period. Berman Fox changing it, period.
Yeah, and we want people to
So
copy us.
it goes like, our intention here was to start a ripple that goes way beyond Highgate.
And I want to talk about all of that stuff, because to me, that drop of water to waterfall is incredible. And I think we just all need to understand that these small collisions and conversations, those collisions and conversations don't happen where you ask someone to do something, where you kind of break down that wall of like client, vendor, friend, vendor, like, and to do that takes a little bit, or a lot of vulnerability, right? Because you're going out on a ledge saying that this is important to you. Can you do it? Right?
Totally.
And so I think that idea of vulnerability is really important to this conversation as well, because we can't really make change if we're not opening up, measuring, being vulnerable, opening the kimono, if you will.
Completely.
Before we get into like that open-hearted, and even you said, like, you just said open heart surgery, but it made me think open-hearted, just conversations where there's no mask. There's an ask and a need, or a want and a desire. You look at what you do, from opening these projects, building these buildings, doing these crazy, from a design and construction perspective. It's not typically something that even though they're hospitality spaces, it's not typically something where you're exhibiting hospitality in trying to be on time, on budget, on schedule. So to use it as a departure and launch point into the conversation, what does hospitality mean to you? And how does that relate to you having all of these other accountabilities of getting things open? But tell me about that.
So I think it's really difficult to define hospitality in a sentence. I think hospitality is more of like a way of life. It's how you just show up in the world. It's very important that a hotel exhibits extreme hospitality to their guests. But I think hospitality extends way beyond the 4 walls of a hotel. I mean, like, I work for a hotel owner, operator, developer. So we're rooted in the hospitality business, but I'm in an adjacency, if you will. But I still have to show up exhibiting hospitality to the teams that we build, to the teams that we lead, to the partners and the vendors and everyone. We assemble these huge teams of people to accomplish the goals of transforming these buildings into like something special. And even though we've got deadlines and budgets and investors and all those pressures to perform, I actually think if you don't show up with hospitality, you decrease your chances of accomplishing those goals. Because when I sit down with a contractor, sit down with a subcontractor, sit down with, a shipping company, like all the different jigsaw pieces that go into making up the puzzle. When I sit down and talk to people about why I'm pushing for this, because what you do impacts this, and then when that happens, we're going to actually meet our goals and everyone's going to be elated and we're all going to do this together again and again and again. But when you just like say, I need this by then, and someone's like, I don't know how to do that. But when you actually break it down and say, look, here's what I need and here's why, like, what can you do for me? And it's kind of going.
That's what you did with me.
Yeah. I mean, it's going that extra, like, the devil's in the details, but I think the magic is in the details too. and you have to get down into the inner workings of the project teams. And whenever people understand what you're trying to do, it's so rare that people says like, you don't get a no, you get, let me look at it. Let me take a look at it and we'll come back. And there's half of the solution there, and then maybe the half of the solution is with another vendor partner, and you get there. But you have to really sit with people, because at the end of the day, we're building these hundreds of millions of dollars worth of spaces, but it comes down to people putting them together, and the human interaction and the openness, and to your point, vulnerability with up and down, like the leadership chain. To me, that's where the magic happens in these projects, because it really is a bunch of humans putting their brains together to create something special. And I really believe everyone on the team is as important as the next person. Like the interior designer or the architect who are leading the creativity, they're so important, but so is our carpet supplier, so is our case good manufacturer, so is our lighting designer. Like if any one of these pieces don't work, it's a house of cards, it all falls down. So imparting on the team that you need to be open, you need to communicate. You can't just ask, you got to explain why. And when you explain why, you're going to get a better answer.
So I love how you said that the devil and the magic are in the details. You have a pretty cool origin story, but one of the things that struck me and has always struck me throughout my career and my journey is the problems are the greatest opportunities for learning. And I'm curious on two things. One, I want to hear, like, I don't know, listeners, if you hear his accent, he's not from Staten Island. He's from Ireland, a different island. And now he's living in another island out in Hawaii. But I'm curious how you found your way into hospitality. But before we go there, a story that you shared with me, I think it was at the Hilton Hawaiian Village. There,
probably 15 years ago.
It was 15 years ago, but it was a huge nightmare. You were involved in some crazy litigation because it was like there was a superlative, the biggest something that
mold.
The which?
Mold litigation.
Oh, it was mold. Okay, I didn't know that. So there was mold, but then you went through and they basically stripped down the entire hotel. You were an expert witness, and when you said magic and devil in details, it brought me back to that story you shared with me years ago about how that was like an MBA in learning the magic and the devil in the details. So share a little bit about that and how you learned so much.
Yeah. So it was a hotel that was built in Waikiki, I think in 2000. And I had moved to Hawaii in 2000. So I remember when I moved there, I saw this building being built in Waikiki. And about a year after it opened, it shut down and it had mold infestation. And no one knew what was going on. And it started to grow basically on every surface in the building. And the company that I worked for at the time, RLB, we were brought in by the owner to just demolish 5 rooms, and they wanted to see what was going on in the cavities of the walls to see if there was a pattern of airflow that was kind of tied to mold growth. So I'll try not to make this too technical or boring. But long story short, we ended up realizing there was a host of problems with the building. There was no one thing that made this grow, but it was like a perfect storm. Part of it was the orientation of the building. Part of it was the type of facade on the building, the mechanical system in the building. So the only way to remedy the problem was to strip the building back down to its structure. So this was a 12-month-old building. There was a 25-story tower, I believe. You could stand in the middle of the floor and look right or left, or north or south, and you could see all corners of the building. There was nothing left except like stud walls. Everything had to go.
And how much did it cost to build and then take everything apart?
I don't remember exactly, but I think at the time it cost about, this could be not completely accurate, 60 million to build and about 50 million to like fix.
And then they had to rebuild it.
So,
that was included in the rebuild.
That was the rebuild.
Because the core and shell was
and it was shut down for a year. So we mobilized this team to work 24/7. We had 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week for 12 months. And we were the project managers. And I was a year and a half out of college, and it was like sink or swim. But the big lesson there was whenever we took the building apart, we started to see things that weren't done correctly, and that became like a bigger part of this whole litigation. It was like there was a lot of shortcuts. There was a lot of stuff behind the walls that no one ordinarily would ever see. Um, and it embedded something in me that has stuck with me forever. It's just like risk. There's so much risk in putting these projects together. If you don't have the right project team and the right QA, QC, making sure that things are done correctly. And a year after the hotel was rebuilt basically with a new mechanical system. So we had to end up drilling all these cores through the building, running all these new ductwork through an existing building, and creating an entirely new mechanical system.
Wow.
And the day the hotel opened, I went to the attorney's office and spent the next 2 years in the attorney's office helping be a quote unquote expert witness, strategizing on the lawsuit the last 2 years in litigation. So that was kind of my first almost 3 years in this
Yeah.
business.
So to me, if I had that experience, I would be very into everything I could learn from it, but I might run away from ever building a hotel ever again. What are you, a glutton for punishment, or like, what kept you in, or what kept you in hospitality, but not just in it, like at a young age, but also forging this career path and passionate journey about like staying in here and affecting change, and like what kept you in?
I mean, I've kind of been around construction like my whole life. Like all my summer jobs in high school and college was always working for a contractor. It was just you're going to do some manual labor on a construction site. I think maybe my dad did that to keep me at college, actually. I never wanted to finish college. I was like, I just want to work. I want to go work. Most of my high school class didn't go to college. And my dad was like, you need to get your college degree. Just get it. And at the end of when we got to the summer break every year, I was like, I'm ready. I'm done. And he would make me go work for these like brutal contractors. And by the end of the summer, I was like, I'm ready to go back to college for another year. And on my graduation day, he said, all those horrible summers you had, like shoveling concrete and, just doing the worst jobs. He said that was all by design so that I would see this day. So he said, once you get this piece of paper, you can do whatever you want, but you needed to get this piece of paper, which was something I really appreciate from him. But so I was kind of around construction. My dad was in he worked for a building product supplier. They had their own quarry and they made concrete and CMU blocks and all this sort of stuff. So it was just kind of in me. And then in some ways that experience, especially in the 2 years in the law firm, I actually really loved it. Like I loved understanding what went wrong. And I loved then the strategy on like how to like build this kind of like case where we were being fair every step of the way. We're always like, we're going to be fair with everyone. We got to resolve this. And I really loved the strategy piece. And then as that litigation was winding down, we started to like work on some new big projects. Like we had gone from like a really small project management company, and this mold litigation project kind of threw us into a new stratosphere, and the whole team learned, like it was an MBA for the whole team. And when we got through that, we started like people were knocking on our doors. We're building a new tower. Like, people knew that we knew what not to do from that experience. And at that time, I was just part of like, when I joined RLB in 2000, there was 3 people. When I left in 2009, we were like 70 people.
Wow.
And I was just kind of part of that like momentum of like building up this big project management team and getting more responsibility in every project. And it was exciting. Like, it was really exciting. And like, thankfully, I've never found myself in a project like that again. And I think that actually helped me like
look around the
be
corners.
more successful
Yeah.
on how to complete these projects and avoid all that stuff.
And going back to that idea of vulnerability and asking and telling and asking and also giving the why, how do you think that that nightmare of a scenario and litigation and project and taking the building apart and rebuilding it, how do you think that helped you to learn how to ask for why so that you can help your teams do more and not have that happen again?
I think I learned like through that litigation that even though this was a horrible situation, I saw like attorneys on all sides of the argument still being like graceful, and even the companies involved were like graceful with the situation. Um, I think that like taught me that even in like really tough situations, you can still have grace and you can still have like they were having open, honest conversations about what do we do here? How do we solve this? Like together almost with insurance companies. Yeah, I mean, I've always said that that was the biggest learning I've had in like 25 years doing
Mm.
this. And there's probably a lot I've learned that I don't even know. It's just kind of, it was so intense. It was a project that ran 24/7 for a year, and then I went to the attorney. I showed up at the attorney's office every day for work. That was my office for I was just part of the firm for 2 years.
Mm.
And I just sat next to one of their named partners, and I was 24 now or 23 at the time. And he and I worked, and this guy was like in his late 50s, early 60s at the time. And he and I worked like partners. And he actually, and I brought this up recently at one of Highgate's leadership conferences. I had to speak about just leadership. And that guy made me feel like I was a named partner in that company. And like he gave me such a voice, and he like actually listened, even though he knew I had like, 2 or 3 years of experience at the time. But like he saw something in me, and the way he led me made me want to do more for him.
Mm.
And like he would call me occasionally on a Saturday, but apologize for calling me, but say like I would never do this, but I really need this. And I would have ran through a wall for him just because of how he made me feel seen and heard. And I'm still like friends with him today. But I think all of those experiences kind of, for better or worse, like shaped me a lot, like to who I am today at work.
The partner who took you under his wing,
Hmm.
um, how did that mentor-mentee relationship inspire or impact you with any and all of the teams that you've built since then?
It has impacted me in a huge way for sure, because like I learned more and did more because of him. And when we build these teams for projects now, like I have this belief that most people show up to work and there's like 20 or 30% left in the tank that never gets tapped.
Mm.
And I think that's primarily down to like leaders not creating spaces that allow those people to like be a bit more vulnerable, have an idea, and maybe they're like afraid to say it in case they're afraid of judgment, or they're like, well, I'm not the most experienced person in the room, so I shouldn't be saying that. So like he taught me that like I was going to him with like strategy on this litigation. Like, hey, here's what I think we should do because of this. And he's like, wow, that's a great idea. And maybe like he saw that I wasn't tarnished from being in the business for 20 years. So I just had these, ignorance is bliss sometimes.
Mm.
And I just had these thoughts that were like, well, this kind of makes sense to me without any, baggage behind the thought. It was just a thought. And I would share it, but I shared it with him because I wasn't afraid to be judged by him. I was like, he'll listen to me and he'll like tell me if he thinks it's a bad idea, he would sit and explain, that's a great thought, but it's not going to work. And here's why.
Mm.
So there was learning like all the time with him. And like, I try to create spaces as best I can for the most junior person in a big design or a big charrette or a big workshop. Like sometimes I'll say, hey, what do you think? I haven't heard you speak yet. And sometimes like they have the best ideas. And I also think, you know, I always say that in pre-construction, like if you've got the right contractor, there's so many brilliant minds in construction companies. and they're great technical problem solving, engineer kind of like, wired minds who are just problem solvers, because when they start construction, all they do is solve problems all day long. You've got a set of drawings, you've got a plan, you've got all that stuff, but sometimes you got to throw it to the side and just solve the problem that's in front of you, because no one knew that behind that wall there was going to be a bunch of abandoned pipes, that don't meet code or whatever the case may be. So like trying to create a space where everyone in that big room can speak, not just the people with the biggest titles, and then B, like tapping into like some of the people that you don't ordinarily think might have the right ideas. Like, hey, let's get the contractors in here. Like, what do they think about this detail, or what do they think about this procurement plan? And I think the delta between doing that and not doing it isn't like 2 or 3% in terms of like brilliance that's out there. I think it's like 20 or 30%. I think it's massive.
I think so too.
And like a project that we did when I first joined Highgate was Alohilani. It was the Pacific Beach.
Mm-hmm.
You and I sat and had lunch there like a few years ago. And like that was our plan for that project, was like big and audacious. And people were like, it can't be done. Like you can't build a pool deck there. Like you don't have the structure. If you build a pool deck there and we drop a pool down, you're going to kill the ballroom underneath. And I was like, well, let's go on top of it. Let's go up on top and we'll build all these terraces. And they're like, how do you do that? I go, we're going to do a pedestal system. We're like, well, we've never done it more than like 2 feet. Well, we're going to do 8 feet. We're going to make it work. The structural engineer is going to help us. And the structural engineer is like, gosh, I've never done this before. And I'm like, does that mean it can't be done, or just means you haven't done it before? Let's engineer it. And we started like creating this, super cool hotel. And it was like a 4 or 5 year effort, but it really was like everyone on the team. And when I talk to people now, we finished that project 6 years ago. And even when I talk to some of the people that worked on the project with us, they still like, the first thing they'll say is, God, like Alohilani was a challenge, but I'm so proud of it. Because they all did stuff they didn't think they could do. I mean, there were so many easy off-ramps, but and I'm not saying it was like, I really believe we could do it. And I just wanted to like get a team of people that could believe it.
Or maybe they didn't even believe they could believe it, but that question you said, like, can it not be done? Or have you never done it?
Yeah.
I think to me, when trying to affect change in any challenge, it's, okay, what would it take to do 10 times whatever that other thing is?
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's not possible right away, but when you just don't think of any encumbrances, like here's a magic wand, what does it take to get it done? Like, don't think about money, don't think about people, don't think about technology.
Limiting beliefs.
Yeah, get rid of all those limiting beliefs and you'll figure out what it is. It might take a couple steps to get there.
Totally. You might not get it done 10x on the first try, but maybe it's 2x.
Yeah.
And then 2x opens up a bunch more ideas to get you to 6x.
Mm-hmm. And maybe sometimes it's just straight up not possible. Going back into those little stepping stones on your path, we tend to learn most from the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And those challenges, we're forced to listen, right? We're forced to open our eyes. We're forced to take in a lot more so that we can get our head around the scope of what we're dealing with. And I've been through some crucible projects or parts of projects with you, and we've gotten through it, but it was always mutually respectful. We have an issue. How do we get through it? We get through it. But those crucibles offer that moment of vulnerability. I think, actually, if I were to think out loud on that one, it would also make me think, before you brought up the mind click thing of putting yourself out there, where I was also ready to listen because we had a previous relationship. You and I were sitting like this at the Nomad Hotel in the Library Bar, and my dad had recently died, or he'd recently died. We had a memorial service. I'd done all this journaling and self-exploration, and you just went on this incredible retreat and did a whole deep dive. You mentioned your dad earlier before, but I said, like, what did you get the most out of it? And you were like, just a greater love and appreciation for your parents, right? And I was sharing what I had gone through with the loss of my dad, and how I was able to, actually, he might've been like the first real interview I did, because he died. He came back to life. and I got to like interview him and ask him all the questions I was too scared to ask him over my
What a gift.
life. It was amazing.
Hmm.
Um, but because we had shared that with each other, it opens up this real kind of heart to heart connection where I think if your heart is open, your ears are open, and that's where you listen. Um, and I think it was shortly after there you started working at MindClick, and then you said that. But because of that, because you created space for me, I created space for you. Whenever we connect with each other, it's like a real meaningful, we're both hearing each other,
Completely.
right?
Like we haven't sat together like this for, I don't know, like we see each other at BDNY or HD and it's like ships passing in the night. But I think the last time we sat kind of in a quiet room like this was probably at the Nomad,
Yeah.
which was what we said 2018, early
Mhm.
2018. But I agree. Like if you show up the right way, I think other people will meet you where you're at. And if you show up closed, even though with personal relationships, family dynamics at work, like you're responsible for at least 50% of what you bring to the table.
Mhm.
And like if you're bringing your full 50% open, chances are the other person will like maybe not meet you all the way, but they'll meet you closer to where they would otherwise meet you if you show up with the bad attitude or bad energy.
If I could also go back to that story of us sitting there, you shared another story of, I think it was before you were in college. You were in high school, and you had like a near death experience,
Mm.
right? And try and tie, I want you to share the story if you're okay with it,
Mm-hmm.
but also kind of tie that into how you learned how that helps you with vulnerability.
Yeah. So I was actually in college.
Oh, you were in
Yeah.
college. Okay.
Yeah. I was in college. I was studying in Belfast in Northern Ireland. I was at college there from 1996 to 2000. So this was like in 1999. I was in my final year, and at the time I played soccer for the college, but I also played soccer on in like the professional leagues in Ireland. So I was playing I had a game back there. You can play club and college at the same time. So we had the club team had a game in Belfast, but the team that I was playing for was from a different part of Northern Ireland.
Mm.
So rather than me travel an hour away from Belfast to come back to Belfast, I said, guys, I'll just meet you at the stadium. I'll know an hour and a half before the game. So this was kind of before the peace process. This was like, it was, there was still a lot of like stuff happening in terms of terrorism and bombings and shootings and whatnot. And at this time, there was it was 45 or 60 days. I can't quite remember, but there was a tit for tat like murder happening every day of um, a Catholic taxi driver would get shot on a Monday and on a Protestant taxi driver would get shot on a Tuesday. And this was going back and forth for like weeks on end. And every evening in the news, it was like a headline. And I had to get a taxi in the middle of this whole thing. I had to get a taxi from the middle of Belfast out to like where the stadium was. And Belfast was very segregated at the time. And there was like roads and streets that if you were a Catholic or a Protestant, you just didn't cross. It was like, there was parts of the city that could have been in another country. I just never even thought about going there. But the stadium we were playing at was in a part of the city where I'd never been before, and probably shouldn't be.
Mm.
And I was like, God, I have to get a taxi in the middle of this, crazy every shootings every 24 hours. So I went to the nicest hotel in the city and said, I'll get a taxi from their lobby that decreases my chances of getting murdered tonight. I can laugh about it now. But so I get in a taxi. It's like, you know, winter weather. It's miserable outside. And we're driving through the city. We cross the street that I'd never crossed before. And we start to like drive down these streets where there's just crazy sectarian slogans on the sides of buildings. A lot of the streets are kind of boarded up and kind of bombed out. And we come on the street where there's concrete barricades where you have to like zigzag like S shape through the street, and there's no street lights. They're all like kind of busted, and most of the houses are just boarded up. And I could have been like anywhere in the world. Like it wasn't even the same city where I like lived in as a student. And we come to the top of the street, and I see two black silhouettes in our headlights, and I can tell that they've got machine guns strapped across their back. And I was like, oh my God, like this is it. Like I'm done. And I just sat in the back of the taxi with my head down, and I just started praying. And one of the guys came up to the car, and the other guy kind of stood in front of the car with his hand out, telling us to stop. So as the guy got closer, I could see that he had a black balaclava on his face, and he just had his eyes were cut out in his mouth, and he was all in black. And he came up to the car. The driver put the window down, and he said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I'm going to the Oval, which is the stadium where I was playing." And he said, "Who's this?" And he said, "This is one of the players." And he got his machine gun and put it, and he like pushed it on my throat, and like I was kind of choking on my Adam's apple. And he said, "Who do you play for?" And that's basically a question: are you Catholic or Protestant?
Mm.
And I was raised Catholic. I was up until that point, I was playing for an all Catholic team, and a few months earlier, I transferred to an all Protestant team, and I was like the only Catholic on the Protestant team. And when I said the name of the team, that was his like, he was like, okay, he must be a Protestant. And he scraped his gun off my chin and took like a lump of skin with him and said, "Go ahead." And I never spoke to the taxi driver. He never spoke to me. He drove me to the stadium, and I was like just shaking like a leaf.
And did you box that up and deal with it later? Or how did you process that?
I kind of didn't. Like, I didn't tell my parents until maybe like 15 years later.
Wow.
Because my mom at the time wanted to take me out of college because she thought it was dangerous. And I was like, well, if I tell her the story, there's no way I'm finishing college. So I just kind of told a few friends, and
you'll get stuck on all those construction sites that your dad was making.
exactly. I'll be shoveling concrete for the rest of my life. So yeah, I never really like, processed it, actively, intentionally processed it for years later. I started that game, and I like was like a lamp post on the field. I couldn't even move. I just was like frozen. And the manager yelled at me for 45 minutes. At halftime, he sat me down. He was like, "What the F is wrong with you?" Like, he just was like beside himself that I wouldn't even move for the ball. I couldn't. I was just like paralyzed. And he just like subbed me off at halftime. And I was like, gosh, I just want to like go home and see my mom.
I can't even imagine. But if you think about on your journey and kind of getting the most out of others and vulnerability and meeting them where they are, I remember you sharing that story with me when we were sitting at the Nomad Library Bar, and I was just like struck.
Yeah,
it was crazy because I can't even imagine. But like where I wanted to go with it was, you shared it with me, and then we were talking about what we were doing, and then I think in the what you were doing, you had a crisis of, maybe not a crisis, but like a lack of confidence that like you were kind of not centered on your values because you were just building stuff. You weren't taking into account the sustainability angle or hospitality for the planet or whatever you want to call it. Or, and then I think from that point forward, you really started looking, and you changed what you were doing. You found this passion. I almost got the feeling after that conversation that you might've wanted to go into a whole different track. Right?
Yeah.
So how, in a way, what I'm trying to think about is like, how have all those steps, and the shocking ones too, helped you be more vulnerable, to help you get the courage to not leave what you were doing, but actually forge a new path to create all of this impact and get everyone else on board, or as many people on board as you can, to impact the world positively?
Yeah. Like going back to that incident, in hindsight, I think it's given me like perspective that I couldn't like otherwise get. And that really was like a life or death situation, like literally. And, a lot of the conversations that we want to have, but are afraid to have, are not life or death situations. They're just conversations. And I wouldn't say that like that became like, that's what led me to anything. But I think that incident has definitely made me realize that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be open. It's not the end of the world, you know, and I just think, Dan, when you can be like open and honest, but also humble, 9 times out of 10, like people will listen to you and like meet you where you're at. But someone has to be willing to go there. I think there's just so many of us are walking around wearing masks and we're trying to like be perceived as something we're not. And there's a whole host. I mean, we could go into the whole Hoffman conversation for another hour on that as to why. But, you know, I would say that incident in Belfast when I was a college student and Hoffman are like two of the biggest things that happened in my life, that whoever I am today, like those two incidents had a big influence on it.
Okay, so if you were to add that in the terrorist incident, the gun at your throat with Hoffman, because you didn't do Hoffman until 20 years later, maybe, plus or
19
minus,
years later.
19 years later. And then you feather in that kind of crisis of confidence of what you were doing. It took 20 years. Like things don't happen overnight.
They don't.
But if you add those two things together and all the other work that you were doing and introspection, how did that give you the courage to not leave your vocation, but to forge a new path?
Well, so the current role I have at Highgate is like, EVP of Lucid, which is our in-house design and construction studio. And that role is basically overseeing all of Highgate's design and construction activities globally now for the company. And I've had this like I've had this internal moral crisis of, gosh, I love what I do. I love creating. I think even as much as loving creating stuff, I love building teams and like seeing teams punch above their weight. Like that gives me sometimes like what we create is the byproduct of like making people punch above their weight, versus the other way around. And when I took this role, I realized that, gosh, this conflict that I have of we're creating all this stuff and it's beautiful, but we're kind of doing it with our eyes closed and we're not even like thinking about the impact, let alone measuring the impact. So when I took this role, I was like, gosh, I think now I have like a platform to like maybe create some change. And like with the platform for me came like a responsibility to create change. Like I don't think it would be right for me to just have this, no, Highgate's got plus or minus 500 hotels. And we're renovating, gosh, I think like in the last 2 years, we've probably renovated, including select service, we've probably renovated 70 plus hotels. So like I can't sit in this seat and have that platform and not try and use some of it for good and try and create this change that, I mean, we're probably like, to use a baseball, we're probably in the first or second inning in terms of like where we need to go. But at least for me 2 years ago, I wasn't even like in the game in terms of like impact and change. So yeah, one of the first things I wanted to do when I took this job was have a conversation with our leaders about, guys, exactly what I just said to you. Like, I have this conflict. I love what I do, but I think there's an opportunity for us to like be the agents of change. And like, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. To me, it's more about changing mindsets and getting these conversations embedded into projects on day one. If you try and like embed a sustainability initiative, or bringing in another consultant, or asking vendors to change, their ways of doing business midstream, it's kind of impossible. It has to be intentional at the kickoff meeting. Like, here's what we're trying to build, here's what we're trying to create, but sustainability is really important to us. And here's the things that we want to measure. And now let's talk about who are the people we need to surround ourselves with to to measure. So it's something that I take. It's not passive for me. Like, this is like intentional, and it's kind of a mission.
And that's what, when you originally said it to me, there was almost, I could tell the level of importance
Yeah.
just in the way you were saying it to me. I was like, okay, I hear you.
And there's so much more we have to do. Like, I'm glad we're started.
Well, let's talk about that, because again, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yep.
Ultimately, you can question whether being human is sustainable.
Yeah.
Like, we're messed up and flawed beings. But when you found your voice on this new platform, and this became important to you, and you started winning hearts and minds to come over onto your strategy, environmental strategy, like, walk us through some of the metrics, the measurable metrics from that first project you did to kind of where you are now, and then what's exciting you most about the future.
So the first project we did was the Hyatt Regency in San Francisco, and this was like 2000 into 2001. And all we measured on that project was the impact of the FF&E, and how all of our vendors were performing based on a mind-click rating. And it was a huge effort, because in that case, we didn't start it on day one. Like, the project was happening. We were about to go into model room review. So like, POs had been issued, furniture had been delivered. And we were like, we might not do well here, but let's just start. Like, let's not wait till the next project, because that could be another couple of years. So we just started. And we actually got a really good rating because the whole team got behind it immediately. And some of our vendor partners changed how they're doing things midstream on the project, which was incredible. So, that was kind of like FF&E. And now, since then, we've hired a VP of sustainability who's focused solely on what's Highgate as a company doing from a sustainability standpoint. Not just Lucid is part of it, but we operate about 500 hotels, and there's opportunities in every single hotel to change, from single-use plastics to how we wash linens to solar to EV. What type of mechanical systems do we have in the buildings? What kind of rebates can we get from local jurisdictions to change to smart thermostats? There's within the Highgate ecosystem, there's so much active action right now to move towards a more sustainable company. I think for Lucid, I think it's expanding the FF&E effort and getting more and more people to get on board, like you guys did. I think OS&E is a big area, because that's a consumable that's constantly getting changed out and rebought and rebought and rebought. And I think it's base building materials. We're starting to do more ground up construction, and I think there's a massive opportunity for us, again, at our scale, to go to some of these big, suppliers and say, guys, this is important to us, and it's important to us now, but guess what? In 5 years, it's probably going to be important to everybody. So get on board now.
On the base building materials, I was recently listening, like yesterday or the day before, to an interview that a journalist I'm a big fan of, Kara Swisher, she was interviewing Bill Gates on a bunch of his initiatives. And on sustainability, he was talking about, from creating energy to building materials. And he was saying, he's like, listen, concrete is one of the biggest carbon contributors. He said there are other alternatives, but they're super expensive. But he said once you get a couple of people trying to do it and there's a will and a way, the scale, like it'll grow,
Yeah.
and then the scale will bring the cost down
Yeah.
tremendously to where
Yeah.
it's on par. And I have an experience of that just with the advent of the U.S. Green Building Council, USGBC, and LEED. In 2018, I became a LEED accredited professional, and we changed our supply chain of what we could use in building our furniture. And around that time in 2018, 2017, oh no, it must have been earlier. It was 2008. I'm so sorry. I missed a decade. It was 2008. Before 2008, you couldn't even get, or it was difficult to get and expensive to get low VOC plywood or
Yeah.
MDF or just glues without added urea formaldehyde. Now you can't find the other stuff, and it's only readily available. And on par, aside from inflation, the cost is pretty much the same as it was. And it takes leaders like California and the Clean Air Resource Board and LEED and MindClick and your efforts and other people in our industry and construction in general, where that biggest contributor of, I don't even know the technology behind more sustainable or less carbon off emitting concrete, but if there is widespread adoption, that moves the needle tremendously. But it takes these little trickles and water and raindrops to create that waterfall.
Completely agree.
So with that in mind, as you look to the future, what's exciting you most about the future?
The more people I talk about how do we become more sustainable on how we deliver projects, even in the last 4 years, like the conversation has shifted where there's like less resistance today than there was 4 years ago. And people are like, how do we get on board? The conversation is becoming more mainstream and it's becoming more like being sustainable is going to, my hope is that being sustainable is going to become business as usual versus what business as usual has been up to this point. And I think there's a lot of other forces and regulation coming, where whether people want to think differently or not, they're going to be forced to kind of stay in the game.
Okay. And then on that note, what kind of an outsized role or megaphone, or I think you said a halo effect earlier, can our industry have to construction at large?
The folks with the big platforms have to get on board because they are that's the bread and butter for who gets to work on what. So the players with the biggest voices can create the biggest change because others will follow. So, and that's even talking about construction, we've started to, in our RFPs, like one of the measurables that we didn't measure in the past is talk to us about your waste management plan. And like, where are like the bathtubs and where are the water closets that you take out of the building? What's happening to them? Where's the drywall going? Where's the concrete going? Where's all your waste? The amount of like wood that's wasted on a project from just like all the cuts is like crazy. So, and we actually asked them at the start, they're like, wow, like, are we going to lose a job because of this? And I said, it's an ingredient. Like what you do with the stuff you take out of this building matters to us. So I'm not saying you're going to win or lose a job, but it's part of the evaluation criteria going forward.
But you know what else I really appreciate about that is that if you can't measure, you can't change, like you said.
Yeah.
But also going back to how you kick off a project where it's intention and setting this up at the beginning, to hear you say it's in the RFP process, it's really incredible because oftentimes people won't go and do this stuff because they want the perfect solution, but perfect is the enemy of good. Perfect is the enemy of progress because we kind of have to bump into things and break things and be unhappy with the results.
Yeah. Healthy friction.
So that we can keep moving forward and keep falling forward.
Like perfect will stop us from starting.
Yes.
And so So we started to listen to the contractors as to why this is difficult for them. So then we started to say, guys, why don't you tell us as part of this RFP, like, let's try and, because they said this is going to cost us money. We're like, we know that, but we're willing to listen to what the cost is because that cost may be worth it to us in the long run. So we asked contractors to, if you were to try and divert 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%, try and break down your projected waste on the project into like quarters and tell us the premium that you think it would add to your bid as if you were just throwing it wherever it needs to go. And we'll look at that and we'll evaluate it and so we do the same. We create a level playing field. So it's not one contractor thinking, well, if I like divert 50% of my waste, I'm going to be like, no, $500,000 higher. It's across the board. And then we look at that and we're like, guys, this is really important. Like, are there parts of the project that we could VE? Is there things we could do differently? Because we need to try and get this embedded into the project now. Because if we do it after the RFP, if we do it after the budgets are set, it's not happening. It has to be at the beginning. So those are the things where like, how do we flex our muscles a little bit to create more of this change? And look, on the first project and so on some smaller projects, it's not feasible today, but at least we've started that conversation. And on the bigger projects, you know, where maybe you're dealing with more sophisticated contractors who have more resources and more like networks, it's like, maybe we divert 25%, but guess what? That's 25% more than we had diverted, you know, on the last project. And we talk about, guys, how can we get this to 50? So it's that like journey, and it can't be us beating up the contractors. It's like us bringing them on the journey with us as partners.
I don't know if I shared this with you, but I was just at the lodging conference and there was a sustainability panel and there was a gentleman named Bali, something or other, I can't remember his last name. He does PACE financing, which is a really cool concept that hasn't really, people use it, but I don't think people really understand everything about it. And then there was this one gentleman next to me, I forget his name. He brought up the Hotel Marcel up in New Haven, which is the first, passive house rated hotel. There's zero emissions that it gives off. It has a whole solar farm. And I know I've interviewed, I think I sent that to you, but Bruce Becker, who's the architect, developer, designer, he is so passionate that hotels, because they spend more on CapEx than other commercial real estate assets, if they really wanted to, they could become zero emission or passive house or something within 10 years. That could be on one end of the spectrum, right? But now he's been open for a year, and the gentleman sitting next to me was saying, further to whatever their pro forma was, because of all of these sustainability initiatives, from solar to heat pumps to low voltage lighting to all the things that they've done, they're actually, whatever their pro forma was, they're outperforming their pro forma because their utility costs are so much lower.
Yeah.
And so it's a dollars and cents thing now, which hotels and commercial real estate are. But if you take Bruce on one end of the spectrum, who says the whole industry can convert in 10 years if they made their mind up. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I've mentioned that project to other developers who are used to developing things their way. And they say, oh, that was a unicorn project that could never get done, blah, 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 blah. And I think that the truth is somewhere in the middle if you set out with intention to do it from the beginning. And I actually think, just hearing Bruce's passion and his vision, I think it can actually shade way more over there. And my question to Bali from the PACE financing, or the PACE financing specialist, was, how do we see that gap of understanding of what's possible, what's not, how do we narrow it? And I think it's leaders like you, and you're not alone in this, but it's setting out with that intention on projects and a portfolio of projects to narrow that gap. What are your thoughts on that?
It can't happen overnight. And there are going to be projects in certain states or jurisdictions with certain project sponsors that are more like amenable to being more sustainable. And it could be like, because an owner's got a long-term hold, vision for the project versus, a company that needs to like develop it and turn it. So there's a lot of factors that lead into like, how sustainable can you be on a project? But I really believe that like the power is in the collective, and like someone standing on the street corner beating the drum about like being sustainable is not going to get us there, but it has to be like a collective effort. And I do think that we can lean more in the direction that you were alluding to versus, leaning towards 60-70% versus 20 or 30%. Like, I really believe that that's where we can and will end up.
And going back to what Bill Gates was saying, the more we lean over here, the faster we can get to scale.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
faster the cost of all of those systems, the cost of trying to do green concrete, whatever that is. I want to learn more about
Carbon
that.
cure.
The more that we do that and the little steps and the little successes and the little wins we have, it becomes that scale becomes real.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And people that are questioning it today, like, are going to question it less just as time passes.
Yeah.
Like 5 years ago, would we have been having this conversation?
Maybe you and I would.
Yeah.
But I don't think it would have. I feel like it's catching fire in the industry.
Yeah, and that's kind of my point.
And I also think hospitality has an outsized role in that, because from a storytelling perspective, all of the guests that come in, if the staff is passionate, it helps you recruit the whole team that works at the hotel. They can tell that story and evangelize. Those people will go home and look at their homes, their communities, their schools, and there is this halo effect that can happen.
It is a ripple effect, definitely.
It's an uncharted frontier or untapped frontier. It's starting, but I think it's gaining mass, and I think it will tip soon.
Yep. Look, and I think as costs increase, insurances are increasing. Like, and a lot of the stuff is happening because of like climate change. And it's, I believe we're a big part of that. And I think being more sustainable, maybe like in a year-over-year view, you can argue, I don't want to do it. But if you take a longer range view on the cost of not being sustainable versus the cost of becoming sustainable over the long term, becoming more sustainable is an obvious answer in my mind.
I agree. I want to go back in time to you standing like a light post, you said, on the soccer pitch. Probably scratch neck after the gun shoved in your throat. If the Paul I'm sitting with right now, talking to here, were to magically appear in front of that light post, Paul, what advice would you have for yourself?
Well, this is probably the stuff that I talk to my son about now, who's about to go to college. Don't try to be everything to everyone. Have better boundaries for yourself. Like, trust that you are who you are and don't try to be someone else. Because I think I probably spent a lot of time doing that in my younger years. Probably like mostly in career, which, was it good, was it bad? Like, there's a Chinese proverb, right? If you have good luck and bad luck, is it really good luck or bad luck? Who knows? But I think it would be trust who you are and you'll be okay. So I feel like that now.
Love it.
But I didn't feel like that.
Your son's name is Shane or Shay?
Shay.
Shay.
Yeah.
Shay, I hope you're listening. We're going to actually cut that out. We're going to make an MP3 and put it on repeat, and you can go to sleep every night at college listening to that.
Yeah. Shay is definitely an improved version of what I was at his age.
And that's all we can hope for as parents and stewards, right? It's like every generation be a little bit better than the last.
I'm not saying this to be corny, and it's a weird maybe thing to think or say, but I believe it. Even though he's like 18, so many times I feel like he's my North Star. And like, he's got such just old soul morals that there's so many times where I'm like, wow, that's smart.
Awesome.
Yeah.
This has been wonderful.
Yeah, it's been great.
Thank you for hosting us here.
Yep.
If people wanted to learn more about you, Highgate, or Lucid, what's the best way for them to find out?
There's luciddevelopmentgroup.com is our website, and you can see the whole team on there. Highgate.com is the company. My email.
Cool. And we'll put the LinkedIn up there.
Yeah, on my LinkedIn. We've got like Lucid LinkedIn,
Perfect.
which we just started, so Highgate always had DNC. It was Highgate DNC forever. And then 3-ish years ago, we were starting to kind of like look at the team, look at like our growth, like just kind of like making sure we had the right engine in place to support what needed to be supported. So we really went out and methodically, intentionally, slowly, kind of started to like augment the team. And we said, look, we've got some incredible people. We've got some incredible talent. We're doing some incredible projects, not to toot our own horn, but like, I believe it. We said, let's rebrand, like, let's give ourselves identity. So about 3 years ago, Lucid was born. And then we had a website, and now we have our LinkedIn. So, and we're actually now about to do our first like third party project, like
Cool.
outside of the Highgate ecosystem, which was something we talked about. Maybe one day we'll start doing that. And here we are.
Vision, North Star, strategy.
Yeah.
This has been wonderful for me.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you to all of our listeners, because without you guys tuning in every week, we wouldn't be here in this amazing spot,
Yeah.
talking to the likes of Paul and other people who are making a tremendous difference in what we're doing. So thank you.